Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Langer, and if you're not following us on Twitter, because I still call it Twitter, follow us at Lunch Hour Pod on Twitter. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, check out our audio feed on every major podcast platform that's out there. If you're listening to us on one of those podcast platforms, you can check out our YouTube channel as well. Leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and let your friends and family members know how much you're enjoying the Lunch Hour podcast. Very excited to bring our guest on. I think he is a return guest. I know we've had him on in some guys. His name is Patrick Hedger. He is the director of policy for NetChoice. And there's a lot to talk about, Patrick. And I want to dive right in because we just had on Liz Truss, the former prime minister of the UK. Spending a lot of time and actually a bit of time talking with Shankar Singham about this too, about the what's happening in the UK is frightening. And we're not going to get into recent events in the US, but in an era in which the left believes that speech is violence and violence is speech, the idea of the policing of speech in the very literal sense in the UK is disturbing in the context of everything else. And I want to get your thoughts here.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a global problem at this point of people perceiving speech as violence, meeting speech with violence and treating it as such and punishing it as if it was violence. And that has manifested itself in Europe and in the United Kingdom in a lot of different ways through various regulations on speech. In the European Union, you see the Digital Services Act, and then in the United Kingdom, you have the Online Safety Act. And of course, these bills, these regulations sound great. Who doesn't want to be safe online? But of course, the devil is in the details. And what we're seeing is people being arrested for what would be considered free speech here in the United States.
Well, it underscores just how important the First Amendment is here at home. And thank goodness. I mean, like everything else, you flip the concept on its head. And in fact, it gets into the recent comments by the junior senator from Virginia, Tim Kaine, who should know better, being the junior senator from Virginia. The idea embedded in the bedrock of the American governmental political system is the idea that we are endowed by our creator with inalienable rights. And of course, in the Declaration, it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But then, of course, enshrined as the very First Amendment, the fellow Virginian James Madison in the Bill of Rights made the First Amendment number one for a reason. In fact, talk about that. Why is the First Amendment the First Amendment?
Yeah, well, the saying goes that if you don't have the First Amendment, all of the other ones go out the window too, right? The First Amendment is really the key guarantor of our rights and of our freedoms. It's our ability to address and redress government for grievances, and to be able to share ideas and participate in a pluralistic society. I mean, it's really core to everything that we do in terms of our government. So it's really important that the First Amendment is protected because it is the guarantor of all of the other rights as well. In some ways, some people would say the Second Amendment is as well, but the First Amendment really are. They all work together, but.
It's in the property rights community, we used to talk about this issue, the idea of the bundle of sticks, right? And each one is part of the bundle. And if you start breaking them one by one, right, it's easy to break the others. They have to bring them all together, right? When I was a property rights activist, we used to talk about how, property rights undergird everything else. And in the example, this is great. Sorry, Patrick, sometimes I just get impressed by my own brilliance. Anyway, guys, I'm having that kind of a morning. But, I used to talk about this. Back behind me on the shelf, I won't get it down. Sometimes, I will get down books when I'm having interviews. But there is a book back there in which I have several copies of the various Soviet constitutions. And the Soviet Constitution would guarantee free speech, but because property rights weren't protected, it flummoxed everything else. So if they could literally steal the printing press from you, if they could evict you from your apartment building, and this is what I get into with what's happening in Europe, and frankly, what's happening here, it's about the chilling effect, right? These laws, it's not just about punishing the transgressors, but it's Orwellian in that it makes you not want to speak out loud. That's what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're targeting the platforms where people are speaking
Yeah.
as well. And they're putting in place all sorts of rules and regulations that make platforms say, look, actually, we just don't even want to deal with the
Right.
hypothetical liability of potential user speech on our platform. And so you're seeing the chilling effect of platforms either age gating, right? You're having to upload an ID to even listen to music in the European, or excuse me, in the United
Wow.
Kingdom. Yeah, Spotify.
Tipper Gore would be very happy.
Yeah, it's incredible. And then you also have websites and communities, blogs, forums dedicated to benign things like biking or hiking and things like that that have shut down because they don't control user speech. They have
Right.
third parties. You're as a user, you're allowed to go and post whatever you want. That's too big of a liability under the speech regimes that the European Union and the United Kingdom have put in place, so that these websites have effectively just closed down. And so that's the chilling effect you see. And then you have the chilling effect of saying, well, gosh, I don't want my identification associated with my pseudonymous X account or Facebook account or Instagram account, what have you. Or you don't want to have to upload an ID, your most sensitive information, to you just use your Facebook. But that's what's happening in the in the United Kingdom.
Right. And folks are trying to get to it here. And let me come back to this, because it is a form of the temperance movement. And it's the old adage, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? I'm watching this effort overseas to literally to ban alcohol, right? And all of the influence that's out there. And I know we're this is not a tech thing, but just stick with me for a second. I'm at an event over the summer, late spring, a big gal event up in New York, because it's a humble brag, Patrick. And the Queen of Sweden, again, sorry, this is such a stupid humble brag, but the point is, she's giving a speech and she starts talking about banning alcohol. And I'm sitting here going, I'm probably the only person in the audience, as we're all tippling, by the way, right? We're all, engaging our own version of W.C. Fields. We're all there. And I'm like, this is the effort. I don't understand, Patrick. Explain this to me. It's two things that I don't understand. The temperance movement on all levels, right? That is in Europe. I don't understand this. It's Europe. And then the idea that we would be even thinking about doing this stuff in America. How does this happen? Explain this to me. Explain this to all of us.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't want to impugn anyone's motives, but there are a lot of folks that I think there are rightfully concerned with things that kids are seeing online, right? They want to protect children, and I get that. But what they're doing is resorting to really sort of the worst case solutions instead of pursuing solutions that we know work. So they're rushing to essentially say, instead of, if we want to do the comparisons to prohibition, right? Instead of rushing to prohibition, we ought to be investing in, community services and things like that to help with people with alcohol problems. In terms of speech, which is a protected right, what we should be doing is empowering law enforcement to actually go after bad guys that are online, right? We ought to be putting in place online safety education in schools. There's nothing unconstitutional about schools saying, hey, here's how you identify scammers. Here's what to look out for in terms of predators online. Here's where parental controls exist, and you can put those in place. All of that's perfectly constitutional. What we're seeing right now, though, is people rushing to say, well, we want to try and control the type of speech that's online. And we also want to control the people that are online. We want to force people to upload their IDs to be able to access basic services like Google search, YouTube, your X account, your Meta accounts. That's a big problem. And we haven't tried, again, these proven solutions of actually putting resources to going after the core of the problem instead of punishing innocent users.
As you said, you don't want to impute anybody, and I agree with you there. But I do think that there is a certain degree of laziness that is involved here, right? I think it's lazy thinking and lazy action to say, it's like, I don't know, were you ever a Simpsons fan?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
There's that episode where we sort of find out Ned Flanders' background and the fact that his parents were beatniks. Do you remember this?
Mhm.
And he's like now we would say he had massive amounts of ADHD. And his parents are like, we've done nothing and we're all out of ideas. And it's like, and that's what I get the sense that it's a bunch of folks who are like these Ned Flanders, like maybe this was prescient. And I'm inclined to think that I bet Conan O'Brien wrote that episode. But the point is that, we're in an era in which parents don't want to do the parenting, right? If you don't want your kids to talk to strangers, then don't give them tablets early on. Don't give them phones. Don't give them screen time. Take action as a parent to do the right thing.
Yeah.
I mean that, and there's huge problems, Patrick, isn't it, when we decide that we want the government to act in loco parentis?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Like one of my favorite quotes is actually from a children's book, The Phantom Tollbooth. The
Oh,
only
sure. Norton Juster, Norman Juster.
Yeah, Norton Juster. That's
Yes.
right. The only thing you can do easily is be wrong, and that's hardly worth the effort. And everybody is looking for an easy solution to
Right.
difficult problems here. And the easy solutions that they're looking for is, well, we're just going to enlist the trial bar to sue companies into the ground, and that's not going to work. That doesn't take a single predator off the street,
Right.
or off a website. You've got to empower law enforcement. We've seen actually that the federal government has not fulfilled what it was supposed to do. In 2008, there was a bill that was passed. It was actually Joe Biden's last piece of legislation signed into law by President George W. Bush,
Got it.
where the Department of Justice was supposed to study and invest in and report to Congress what they were doing to try and keep the internet safer, and go after online predators. And the Government Accountability Office has found that they basically just have not done that for the
Sure.
last several years. And so instead of saying, let's layer on new regulation, why aren't we doing the things we've already asked the Department of Justice to do?
And that is such an important point, because that seems to be the problem that we always have, is that everybody wants to have that fix. The politicians want the fix and they don't want to go down this road. And that's part of how government inexorably grows. I was going to quip and make a joke that, the reason why it didn't happen is because Joe Biden promptly forgot what he passed. But, let's set that aside for a moment, because there is the other effect of this is the effect on innovation. And, so many, I gave a presentation yesterday, right? And we're seeing this in other areas, most notably, I would say pharmaceuticals, and biotech, right? We have never been as a society better served by technology in terms of helping our lives. And sure, we could go down the road of Dickens and the Tale of Two Cities and say, it was the age of wisdom and the age of foolishness, whatever. Obviously there are downsides to everything, but I think we are living better lives through chemistry, better lives through, innovation. Through technological innovation, the stuff that I can do now that takes me so much less time because of this. There's a real danger in having that stalled, Patrick. Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the European Union and the United Kingdom have really done us a favor. I mean, they're doing horrible things in terms of policy, but they've done
Right.
us a favor in providing sort of that natural experiment where they have tried to essentially pre-regulate every type of technology, where they say, we're going to try and predict the future. We're going to try and predict every single harm that would happen. And instead of just allowing innovation to flourish, you have to come ask us for permission before
Right.
you launch the service. So, and now tell me who's the European Google, who's the European Meta, who's the European Amazon. They don't exist because of that stringent regulatory regime that it's not permissionless innovation. It's mother may I. It's ex ante regulation versus ex post. Yeah, and that's vastly different to what you see in the United States, where we generally allow technologies to launch and then we address narrow problems as they emerge. I mean, imagine trying to layer every regulation we have right now on automobiles onto the Model T. That wouldn't work. The assembly line, we wouldn't have it, right? We wouldn't have the Model Ts. We wouldn't have automobiles like we have them today. That's what the Europeans do with all types of technology. And that's why, if you look back really to about 2000, the European Union's economy was about the exact same size as the US, maybe even slightly larger. And since then, we have more than doubled in terms of the overall size of our economy versus the European Union. that signals that something is very wrong there. And those people there are poorer. They
Right.
really are poorer than the United States. I know it's nice to vacation over there, but to live there is a vastly different experience.
It's nice to vacation because it's so darn cheap. I was shocked at how inexpensive it was to vacation over in Europe back in March. It's interesting because we've had this conversation with Shankar Singham from the Growth Commission about that very issue and about the way that these rules sort of stifle the competitive nature in here. And then I appreciate it because that's exactly what you and I talked about before, was this concept of permissionless innovation. Hey, you've seen the movie, read the book iPencil?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you ever thought about doing a version of it, where you take this precautionary principle and the importance of permissionless innovation and done some kind of weird time travel alternative history and charted, here are the things that could not have happened in cars, and therefore what wouldn't have happened in the world if we had applied the rules of the precautionary principle to the development, not just of the automobile, but of the technology surrounding the automobile. Because you're absolutely right. The world we would still be living, well, I don't even think we'd be living in an industrial era. I mean, I think we'd be taken further back. But if you haven't done this, it's my idea to you today, Patrick. But it's stunning when you think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a really great tangible example that everybody watching now can understand would be ride sharing services, Lyft
Right.
and Uber. They didn't go ask the taxi commission to launch. They just did it.
Yeah.
And had they gone through that process, the taxi commissions on all these cities are designed to stifle competition and
Right.
protect the local taxi medallions. And we've seen that actually in Europe play out, where they, in a lot of places, have banned ride sharing services.
Wow.
But then we lose out on all of the benefits. You look at what ride sharing has done to DUI rates and fatal accidents and things like that. Those numbers have dropped in places where Uber and Lyft are available, and they've dropped dramatically. I think we should be in the business of using technology to save lives, and we'll increasingly see that with driverless vehicles as well, such as Waymos.
Well, let me add to this, right? Because we talk about the ancillary technologies that are created. So you go to New York now, and New York has an unfair tax on rideshare services. They make it purposefully more expensive. But I will say that the rideshare services have spurred innovation in the traditional protected taxi and livery commission. There's an app that was developed. And so the ubiquity right now, cabs are still ubiquitous. And it's funny because I go back and forth with my kids about this, because we go to New York and they want to use an Uber or Lyft. And I'm like, well, I just would rather just go out and hail a cab, because you can now pay for it with an app, which wouldn't have existed beforehand had it not been for the innovation of the rideshare services. And it underscores that competition spurs innovation. You build a better mousetrap, right, Patrick? Talk about this.
100%. And that's what's so ironic about what we see has been passed in the European Union and what is being proposed in the United States. All of these regulations about how Amazon should work, how Google should work, how all of these major platforms should or should not rank content and things like that. Those are all designed under the guise of enhancing competition, but all they'll do is stifle competition,
right?
Because they're locking out the ability for smaller firms to be able to compete because they can't deal with the compliance regimes. I mean, we are talking about thousands and thousands of pages of potential regulations on certain types of technology and platforms. That the startup, right? We all love to talk about the Silicon Valley nerds in their mom's garages. They don't have the lawyers and the accountants to be able to deal with things like this. And so when you're saying, oh, well, we want more competition in the tech space, so that's why we have to have a Digital Markets Act to regulate competition. That's foolish, because all you're doing is locking in place the companies that already have the market share.
Right. Whoever is already the most healed is going to do it. It's why I used to go down this road of, if I saw big business and big government and big labor coming at me with a new rule, I knew that this was supposed to shut small businesses and entrepreneurs out of the marketplace. And it gets to, our colleague Veronique DeRugy at Mercatus, right? She and I have a disagreement about the issue of the small business carve-outs and regulation. Because rightly she recognizes that everybody should stand on their own merits. The problem, and we shouldn't have the regulatory regimes in the first place. The problem is we have these regulatory regimes, and if we didn't have the regulations in the first place, or the attitude towards creating new regulations, then we wouldn't need these small business regulatory carve-outs. The market could work. And before you respond to that, also sort of talking about, not that I want you to defend porn, Patrick, but the reality is that that adult entertainment has been, when they've been an early adopter of technology, they have spurred innovations on their own too, that have, in the same way that the space program in the 60s spurred all kinds of consumer adaptations for things. There are things that these other platforms have done to innovate, the online tech industry, and we don't want to see online tech stifled. That's my point here. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing right now a huge shift in terms of technology and consumer behavior, right? It's really ironic to me that we are still in the process of Google facing antitrust cases for being a search monopoly, all while during that case, OpenAI launches ChatGPT,
Right.
and a huge chunk of Americans shift to using AI chatbots for search instead of a traditional Google search. So what we're seeing is that innovation is a far more effective and a far more rapid check on market power than even the government could be with antitrust action. And I really worry about, extreme regulatory regimes being put in place, or fractured regulatory regimes you see at the state level with maybe perhaps 50 different state AI bills,
Right.
preventing that sort of market evolution that's really necessary. And then you do get stuck with a couple of only a few options in terms of what you're trying to do, because the new market entrants and the new innovators can't meet that need. But I think AI is really changing a lot in terms of how people interact with and behave online. And that's something that we can't afford to stifle, especially as we begin to talk about competition with, there's no AI companies in the European Union, but competition with China.
Right. And it gets down to this issue of whatever the company is today and whatever the product is today, who knows where that company or that product is going to be, right? So Google started off with search, right? And then it became all of these other things. They're a phone company. They're a phone manufacturing company. They're this and that. Amazon started off as a bookstore, but I was just reading that Amazon is now getting into the ride sharing business. I mean, so all of these things, they change over time. Oh, and guess what? They all spur each other. And they're buying up tech from smaller startups, et cetera, et cetera. Let's come back to this because it's something that I so appreciate. Is the issue of permissionless innovation, and I want to flesh that out and the precautionary principle a little more, because it is so vital here. I mean, talk about this with regards to AI and competition and our competition with China. I mean, it's weird because for such a proscriptive society as China is, and I guess they're not really doing, I mean, they are doing some innovation, especially on the coding side of things, certainly not on the actual, I could be wrong, on the tech side. But China doesn't have necessarily the problem that we do in this kind. Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, the China is behind in terms of innovation, but they're still they're catching up.
Right.
And what China's advantage is that if the state takes an interest in something, they'll clear everything else out of the way.
Right.
That's sort of China's
They don't
advantage.
believe in the precautionary principle. I mean, if I'm right, they believe, and they don't believe in permissionless innovation, but you certainly don't have to engage in the level of safety protocols that we do here. Not that I'm laughing about, but go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, if you're well enough connected with the state or the party, you get those advantages. And they're just, with China's size and scale, they're producing some really innovative companies and some really innovative services. And those are services that are competing on a global scale with American firms. And so we want to be able to stay ahead of China there. But the problem with the precautionary principle, I mean, with any type of technology, right? I like to bring it down to its simplest possible level. Design me a hammer that still does its job of hammering nails, but cannot be used as a weapon.
Right.
Right. It's almost impossible to think.
A knife, for that matter, right? I mean, it's the same thing. Yeah. But a hammer, I love the hammer.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you get into this issue of like constantly trying to innovate to appease a regulatory standard that's effectively impossible, versus just taking the time and saying, okay, we understand that this hammer is designed to hit nails. And if you use it, by the way, to hit somebody over the head, we're going to target you as the
Great
misuser of
point.
technology
Right.
instead of going after the hammer manufacturer.
Right. We have a law. We have a law in place. It's called the Laws Against Assault, and we're moving forward from that. I love that. I love that example. It's, by the way, this is why I love these conversations, because it's like the line from the movie Heist. Someone asked Gene Hackman how he figured something out, and he says, I just imagined somebody smarter than me, and then I thought, well, what would that smarter person do? And I went and I did that thing. So I may wind up stealing that from you, Patrick.
Please do. That's the whole point of innovation. And again, to take it to AI, you're never going to be able to prevent misuse of AI in the same way you were never going to be able to prevent the misuse of Photoshop. Or
right,
look, I can write something libelous about somebody on Microsoft Word.
Sure,
right? Is that Microsoft Word's fault or is it my fault?
Right,
and that's really what we're trying to say. Is that
I love it. Someone is going to have to put an engine into. No, I've actually knock wood right here. Don't go and do that. Are you weighing it all into the whole data center fight at all? I mean, this idea. I mean, talk about this, because obviously I don't want a data center being built between two sections of the Manassas battlefield in Prince William County in Virginia. I know that's very parochial for lots of our listeners who are well outside of the Northern Virginia area, but it's one of the big flashpoints. Yeah. Talk about the data center battle and about the electricity transmission battle. I mean, that's happening. Your thoughts here.
Yeah, what's really exciting about AI and data centers is that they are driving conversations that we should have been having maybe 30, 40 years ago.
Right.
That we want to bring manufacturing back to this country. We're going to need more electricity. We're going to need to modernize our grid. And those conversations kind of fell by the wayside as electricity demand kind of flatlined. But now we have new demand. And look, these data centers, they're not being built for the companies. They're being built for you. All of those photos on your phone that you never delete, all of those emails that you never delete, all of those videos on YouTube that you like to go find a new recipe or how to fix your dryer on your own or something like that. Those are all stored in a data center. And it's not that we either have data centers or we don't. The issue is that compared to what, right? So if you don't want data centers to be built, you have to understand that there's still this demand for data storage and data processing.
Right.
And so if you want the modern conveniences and services, do you want a smaller data center at every single hospital and every single school that runs less efficiently than a scaled data center? The whole point of concentrating and doing this processing and storage at a data center is to achieve energy efficiencies, to achieve cost efficiencies. And ultimately, we're finding that data centers, instead of driving growth in electricity prices, are actually absorbing a lot of the fixed costs associated with the grid. So it's really, the issue is that we've got to be building the necessary transmission lines and the power for not just data centers, but manufacturing, residential growth, right? Residential AC is still the biggest energy user in this country. So if we want to build more homes and build more stuff in the United States, we ought to just be building more power plants. And
if Gavin Newsom wants to make every car in America an electric car, as Joe Biden tried to do, we need at least 5 times as much electricity. But you're telling me, Patrick, that when they tell me my stuff is stored in the cloud, it's not actually in a cloud. I mean, I'm shocked at this. Here's what I guess I come back to is, some of this, again, gets down to the laws that we have, right? There are things called zoning laws for a reason. We have had, I mean, to me, a data center building is no different than a massive warehouse building somewhere. I mean, from the outside, the only thing it doesn't have are massive amounts of truck bays and massive amounts of truck traffic, and you don't need a railway siding next to it or a port next to it. That's the thing that I come back to. So, as I said, don't want it necessarily on the Manassas battlefield, though, it is 2025. There are ways that we can mask things, to make them more visually appealing. Heck, I mean, these companies, if they all hire Disney Imagineers, you can make it look like something else. But I mean, at the end of the day, right, it's no different than any other major infrastructure product. And we have laws on the books that guide our way as to how we do this, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, nobody wants to build a data center where there isn't sufficient water or sufficient electricity.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense because the data center needs to be running 24/7, right? If
Yeah.
we can't just turn off your hospital records for a period of time. That doesn't make
Sure.
any sense,
Right.
right? And so they're not locating in places where it doesn't make sense to locate them. And they're driving a massive amount of investment into the communities that they go into. We found that, look, to put a data center somewhere, you've got to have really good electrical and
Yeah.
really good broadband infrastructure, and that has knock-on effects for the community at large. So when a data center comes in and upgrades the fiber, upgrades the transmission lines, the people
Mm.
that are run along that same fiber line and transmission line benefit as well. And you also have the benefits of, look, it's a couple hundred six-figure jobs to maintain a data center in
And
perpetuity.
that's an ongoing thing, right? So yeah, I'm sorry, because that's also one of the things that comes out. Well, once the construction costs are done, they're not going to hire the people, and so talk about that.
Yeah, so you do have a small amount, relatively small
Yeah.
amount compared to something like an Amazon warehouse, but of high-paying, high-skilled jobs at a data center. But there's also, again, sort of the ripple effect you have. Northern Virginia is a great example. Anybody that visits here, you drive along the Dulles Toll Road and you see all of these data centers. But what you also see is a lot of office buildings with a
Right.
lot of high-valued Fortune 500 companies listed on the side, because there's a benefit to co-locating your company close to a concentration of data centers,
Right.
because there are latency issues. And you also know that that's an area that has a high-skilled workforce as well.
Right.
So there are positive externalities that come with these data centers. And really, again, I think the energy cost issue is entirely, I mean, if you look at, there was I think it was a Washington Post story that was trying to say that, oh, data centers are driving increases in electricity prices nationwide. And the state that had the highest level increase of electricity costs was Maine.
Yeah.
It was not Northern, it was not Virginia, it was
Sure.
Maine. And
Right.
there are, to my knowledge, not a lot of data centers in Maine, and over half of the internet traffic in the world flows through Northern Virginia.
Right.
And Virginia's electricity prices, I live here, pretty competitive.
Yeah. No, it's good stuff. But Patrick, just because I think it's important for a refresher, how'd you get interested in this stuff? How'd you find your way to doing this kind of, not just the tech policy stuff, but the issues of permissionless innovation, which is such an important topic. How'd you get down this road?
Yeah. So, funny story. My father was a small business
Wow.
manufacturer, and I heard it every night at the dinner table that his biggest concern was never his competitors. It was the 3 and 4 letter agencies with
Sure.
no regulation or guidance that he would have to deal with. And, you hear politicians talk and they always say, what we want in this country is manufacturing and small business. Well, that was my father.
Right.
And it was politicians on both sides of the aisle that were constantly making it harder for what he had to do. And so that kind of motivated me to get into policy and politics, to understand what's actually happening, because the rhetoric does not match reality. And I got into tech policy because this is an area where, instead of trying to claw back these horrible regulations that are so sticky and hard to get off the books, this is an area where we can prevent bad
Right.
regulations from ever happening. And this is also an area where, if we're not defending the First Amendment, if we're not defending good competition and innovation policy here, those defeats will trickle into the rest of the
Amen.
economy as well. So it's really good to be here on the front lines and the frontier.
I got a weird curveball question for you. Because this is one of the areas, the issue of AI and regulatory compliance is near and dear to my heart. I've been talking about for more than 2 decades now this idea of creating some kind of a business compliance one-stop, right? It is 2025. We have all this great AI tech. You should be able to, as a small business owner, go on a website, type in a few key pieces of information about the kind of business you have, and this one-stop shop portal should be able to spit out every regulation you need to comply with, along with plain language guidance and any paperwork you need to comply with, you need to fill out, and should be able to fill those things out for you. This is not the yes or no question. This is a philosophical question. I had this conversation with a colleague of ours who will remain nameless. And he said, Andrew, I love this idea, but it's always a but. But if we make it super easy for these businesses to comply with the regulatory burdens they have, doesn't it make it harder to undo those burdens, A? And B, doesn't it make it easier to add new burden down the road if we're making it easier to comply? And it's an interesting thought. I'm inclined to disagree, because if the cost is in the complaint, some of it's in the paperwork and compliance costs. I want to get your thoughts on this. Where do you come down on this?
Yeah. I think it's both. It depends on the type of regulatory structure. Yeah, and I can see that argument. I mean, I think that's why I would say the first and best use of AI would be to put it on the Code of Federal Regulations, and then also port in all of the state regulations, and say, where's the overlap? And say, hey, where is something already being regulated at the state level or already being regulated at the federal level? Where's the where are the conflicts? And try to start simplifying the code. That would be the highest, because the Code of Federal Regulations is something like 200,000 pages.
100%, right?
Just the federal, right? You've got state and local too. And I remember, my favorite example is that last I read was a couple of years ago. There are 19 pages of regulations at the federal level for staircases in public places. 19 pages for how to build a staircase.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. So if we can use AI to begin to kind of simplify the code itself and then maybe simplify compliance with what we deem necessary after that, I think that's the better path.
No, listen, it's all good stuff. And isn't it interesting that as we're recording this, the Department of Justice has a request for information out there on the issue of state regulations. And I think you've hit the nail on the head that, perhaps what DOJ ought to be doing is undertaking a substantial review of regulations where there's duplication with federal rules, and that we should maybe adopt as best practices that which does it the best, right? That which has the path of least resistance while achieving the results that we want. Maybe that's the way we go. Before I let you go, one more thing. When you're not doing this work, Patrick Hedger, what are you up to? How do you spend your free time?
Oh, goodness. Well, I just got back from a lovely trip to a part of Mexico where I was snorkeling with whale sharks. So
fun.
I love to travel. I love to find off the beaten path beaches. I grew up in Florida, and now I live in Virginia. And so I never knew how good I had.
Florida?
Tampa Bay area.
Okay.
So St. Clearwater is always home. Go Buccaneers. And so also
let me recommend North Wales. Now, there are some beaches. Llandudno is a wonderful seaside resort community, but if you want off the beaten path, North Wales, mid-March, late March, you just can't beat it. And they're so grateful to have people there, and there are some interesting stories to be told. But Patrick, how do folks find out more about the great work you're doing in NetChoice?
Yeah, absolutely. So you just www.netchoice.org. You can find us on X at NetChoice. You can find me at Pat_Hedger. And those are probably the best places to find our updates.
Patrick Hedger, he is the director of policy for NetChoice. Thank you so very much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
This has been yet another episode of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour podcast. Please, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can find us on all the major podcast platforms that are out there. If you're listening to us on those podcast platforms, check us out on YouTube. Leave a like, a comment, a subscribe. Follow us on Twitter, because I still call it Twitter, at Lunch Hour Pod on Twitter. But I'm your host. I'm Andrew Langer. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.